How do we read our Bible for all it's worth? Part 4. We are going to be looking at the idea of reading the Bible as actors. Reading the Bible as actors. What do I mean by that? Well, I don't mean that we are meant to read and approach the Bible and that we're trying to live out some sort of fake life, like you see an actor doing. They're somebody else, and they're entering into a role and faking it. That's not what I mean. What I mean by reading the Bible as an actor, I mean someone that is approaching the Bible to say, these are my lines that I'm supposed to recite to the world around me. That we have been given in the Bible a script of how we are supposed to talk and think and act and live. And the Bible is meant to be expressed outwardly, not just something that we study and wrestle with internally. That God calls us to act out His promises and His truths to the world around us. When we can read the Bible as actors, to think of the Bible as our script that we can live out, it will greatly enhance our knowledge and love of God, our understanding of ourselves, and help us to put into practice the things that we are reading. One of my things that I heard growing up in my home church as a teenager was the acronym BIBLE, B-I-B-L-E, stands for Basic Instructions Before Leaving Earth. Basic Instructions Before Leaving Earth. And I think that that's kind of a good way to think about reading the Bible as an actor. That God has given us His instructions, not just to read and study, but to put into practice. Instructions to live out in the world around us. James highlights this when he's talking to a church community that he's writing to. He says in James chapter 1, verses 22 and following, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do." Jesus repeats a similar sentiment in Luke, at the end of Luke chapter 6, when he tells a parable of wise and foolish builders. He starts off that section by saying, why do you say, "Lord, Lord," but don't do what I say? That person is like someone who builds a house on the sand, and when the waves and wind come and the storm blows against that house, it's going to fall. But those, he says, who listen to my words and put them into practice is like a person who builds their house on solid rock. And the waves and the wind and the storm beat against that house, and the house will stand because it is on firm foundation. The point of it is God has given us His Word, not just to read it, not just to reflect on it and study it, as great as those things are, and we've already talked about the importance of them, but to actually do what God's Word says, to act it out in our lives. That our study and reading of God's Word should then translate to action. So whenever we have a Bible study, or you listen to a sermon, hopefully the thing that you are saying to yourself is, okay, this sounds really good, but what do I do with it? How can I put this into practice today, this week, this month, this year? And for you, this year, you might want to think about, what does it exactly look like to put God's Word into practice? What does it look like to live out God's truths where you're at? The best thing for you to do, the way that I challenge myself, is whatever I'm studying and reading that day, I immediately say, God, help me to put this thing into practice today. So, if I read a passage about generosity, I would not be doing myself and my faith a a great service at all if I just said, this person is talking about how generosity is a character trait of being godly. That sounds really cool. I hope that I'm a generous person. But rather, as I read that passage, instead what I should say is, this sounds really awesome. I'm going to do something today. I'm going to think of a person or a situation where I can show generosity. And the more that we do that, to actually put God's word into practice, the easier it becomes. The more regular habit it becomes for us. And so, my challenge for you and for myself today is to do just that. Read a Bible passage, whether it's a passage that you've been studying with your community group, in your own Bible reading, or a sermon that you've heard, and think about what is just one action point I can put into practice today, so that I am not merely a listener to God's word, but a doer as well.